There comes a point in time in every marketer's life when we need to tackle a website redesign. And this might be from the aspect of a one-person marketer who's never done this before to a marketer who's been involved on the outskirts of a website redesign and is now thrust in the middle of it and trying to sort out how best to prepare for this very important project. As we know, our website is one of the core elements of everything we do in marketing, and we can't afford to have a poor performing website because then all of our marketing is poor performing. So today we'll talk about how best to prepare for a website redesign and some of the pitfalls that marketers fall into because they're thinking along one line and forgetting about all these other aspects that are so critical to the project. Let's do this.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, TREW Marketing. TREW is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit trewmarketing.com. And now, on with our podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. We're going to share secrets to building a high-performing B2B website. And with me today is Erin Moore, Account Director at TREW Marketing, and Jamie Tokars, Content Manager at TREW Marketing. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks for having us, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
This is going to be so fun. It's not often that we have multiple guests at the same time, and each of you are coming in with a very unique perspective. So I think this will be a lot of fun and very helpful for those that are about to embark on a website redesign, or maybe just getting started and want to make sure that they have all of their ducks in a row and are doing things the right way. And as we all know, there's certain elements of website redesigns that people overlook. So that's why we're here today, to make sure that those often overlooked areas are exposed and taken care of. So let's just dive in. And Erin, I'm going to pick on you the first half, and Jamie, you the second half of this recording, but please chime in whenever you have a thought. Very casual here. So, Erin, what should people be thinking about as they're getting ready for a website redesign?
So you've been on these calls where you start to have a conversation on the sales process or in account planning, something like that. And usually it starts by somebody saying, we need to redesign our site. The content, the layout, it's outdated. Most of the time, though, people are referring to the design. They say the design's outdated, it looks dated, it looks old. Or they're going to complain about their content management system and say, we can't update it. We can't use our content management system. It's not flexible. Somebody built it 5 years ago and it's all code and we have no idea how to change it. And those are most often the things that we hear when people talk to us about a redesign. And then after talking to them for a few minutes, it's really clear that if you haven't updated your website in 5 years, it's not just the setup of it and the layout that's outdated. Your content is going to be really outdated. And we'll allude to this a lot throughout today, but your website design isn't converting your leads. It's crucial, but it's kind of like the table stakes. Like, you need to have a nice looking website to keep people on your site, but your content is what's really going to nurture them. It's going to educate them, and it's going to convert a visitor into a lead. So a lot of the times when we're talking to people about website redesigns, it's more than just the redesign itself. It's a refresh of their content. Sometimes it's a rebranding. Sometimes it's, there's a lot more to it. And that tends to be the first thing that we talk about is, great, you're going to do a redesign. Have you thought about what that means for your content and your strategy? Because a lot of times they haven't. And that ends up being the biggest piece of the project is their strategy up front and then their content development.
Wow, it's a good point. So what I'm hearing is really your website is the vehicle to showcase your content. And it's really should be all about how can you get people to the content as quickly as possible and in a great user-friendly way. But marketers are coming at it, last sometimes when approaching a redesign and thinking more aesthetically.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. And a lot of the times people say, well, I have content right now. I just need a new design and we'll just move it over. And that has never worked. I'll tell you right now, because styles change. If your website layout is changing from those short little pages that were very specific to these longer pillar pages, you don't have that much content. You are going to have to rewrite that page, rethink it. It's going to be a whole different strategy. And Jamie knows from writing these pages, they take a lot more time and input now and a lot more review. So yeah, I can't tell you how often people underestimate the focus of content on their website. And then as soon as you start talking about it, they go, oh, of course I need content. Of course, that's going to be what makes my website successful. But I think because people call it a redesign and there's so much focus on design that it's never the first thing they think of.
Okay. So what are the core components of a redesign? So we talked about design and we talked about content. Anything else?
I would start with strategy. So this again is something that people come to us and they say, I need a website redesign. How much is it going to cost? And I say, I have no idea until we talk through how many pages you have, what the functionality you need is, how much content needs to be written from scratch, and all of the other building blocks. I can't quote this. Like we cannot give you an accurate timeline or estimate as to what your website's going to involve until we've really talked through who are you targeting, what are your goals for this website, what content management system do you need to use, what integrations do you need to use, what functionality do you need, and then again, really diving into that content to say, how many pages are you going to have? What's serving your audience well? What answers all of their questions? What hits their core goals? What answers their pain points? What do we need to create? And what do you have right now? And until we've answered all those questions, you can't dive into a website redesign. So I think strategy ends up being the other most undervalued piece and like under thought about piece. And then of course, as soon as we go through the strategy project, people understand and really see the value of it. And then the website goes so much more smoothly because you've answered all those questions. You're not launching your redesign and learning, oh, I need 10 more pages, or these 5 pages we wrote aren't really relevant and we need to pivot. And it's those things that you find out during the process that make your timeline and your budget just go completely off the rails. So answering it up front saves a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah. And I imagine if someone's listening and they're a solo marketer who's never done a website redesign before, that sounds like a really intimidating project to build that strategy. And so, I know that, Erin, when you go in and build a strategy with clients, you're also advising and saying best practice is this, and here's what we're seeing on high performing websites. So it's not just a battery of questions that a person has to answer. And so that leads me to a question about, I know how TREW Marketing handles this, and we're really coming from a strategic marketer standpoint and thinking about what converts. But what about people that want to build a strategy internally? What are some of the considerations they need to have?
Sure. So to tackle this, I would say first think about who's going to be making all the decisions for your website. You typically want leadership. You want whoever's in charge of marketing. You want somebody on the sales side. Sometimes you want someone on the service side. You want to put together a bit of a panel so that you can make all these decisions internally. And I think the other thing you'll want to evaluate before you even kick off strategy is what you currently have. So thinking about like, do you have a really clear-cut business strategy? Because if you don't know what your core competencies are, if people aren't in agreement, so maybe it's not that you don't know, but it's that there's internal strife over it, you're going to keep having that strife in strategy and in your content development. It's going to make the process really laborious and take a really long time because you're going to keep running up against these business conversations. So I would say as much as you can, getting everyone on that panel and in the company in agreement on what are we prioritizing, what are our core business goals, and then kind of extrapolating those into now what are our website goals? Why are we tackling this project? What are we hoping to get? Is it that it's really outdated? Is it that our messaging is completely off? So there's a couple things to do first. And then of course, Jamie will talk about this with content, but before you really launch into a website, you want to make sure your brand positioning is set and you want to make sure your marketing plan is set so that you can prepare for what's coming in the future. And then going into strategy itself, thinking about, again, what are your goals? What are you hoping to get? How are you going to measure success? Identifying who your core personas are and what they need from your website is going to be that next step. So same thing, if you don't have personas, you're going to have to stop and build them. And identifying what your website map and navigation are. And I like to do this by breaking down your current one and identifying the core pages from your metrics. So here's our top performing pages and your worst performing pages. So kind of identifying like what works well and what doesn't, so you know what to improve, and then also what not to touch too much, in terms of like, you're not going to remove your top performing page. And that'll really help guide that conversation about your hierarchy to say, great, we've got these 3 service pages that do phenomenally. These 3 do terribly. Do they have the wrong names? Are we grouping them the wrong way? Are they actually not the services our people care about? And it gives you some guidelines to have those conversations, to talk about what is our website going to look like. And then there's other stuff like what websites do you like and dislike that kind of guide your styling. But those are the main things. It's the goal identification, the persona identification, mapping content to those personas. So identifying what they care about and what they're looking for on your site, and then talking through the hierarchy. Those are kind of the big building blocks, doing strategy internally.
And I like what you said about it being a very data-driven process. So you're looking at what's performing well today, what's underperforming, those sorts of things to help guide those decisions.
Yeah, you can guess all you want, but until you look at the metrics, a lot of the times you'll find that you're off base, or it'll reinforce that. So that's one of my first steps, is doing a really thorough look through of Google Analytics or whatever system's currently being used.
Okay. So once your strategy is in place, what's the order of operations from here? I know there's some key redesign activities that happen. Is it design next, or what comes next?
Yeah. Once you've got the strategy, you'll typically in that strategy also be identifying, if you don't know what content management system you want to use, you'll think about it then. You'll think about functionality. So if you need anything custom coded, if you need e-commerce, if you need an integration, I like to map all of that out before moving into design, because again, you don't want surprises in the design process. You want to know going into it that you need e-commerce, because that might impact what tool you pick. You might go for a different hosting system or a different content management system. So once you've got all that baked, then I like to move into design. We typically do templated websites for a couple of reasons. They tend to be much more cost effective. They've got a lot of functionality built into them. So it's not that you're hiring a developer to build 12 pages and then you've got nothing else. And if you want to change your website in a year and add something that's not there, you have to build it from scratch. So we like to use templates. And what we'll normally do when we kick off a website redesign is we'll lay out a couple options based on styling. If you tell us you like big white space, or you like really bold colors or something like that, we'll look for that style, but we'll also look for that core functionality. So if we know that we need a number ticker, or we know we need, really robust resource pages with filters, you're picking out something that has that in there versus going off of just the look, because the look is very malleable and the functionality not so much. So that would be the first piece, is looking for a design that actually works with like your core functionality requirements. And then from there, we'll normally lay out pages. So looking at those templates, we'll either take something that's pre-built or kind of Frankenstein a page together so that content can kick off. And Jamie will talk about this in depth, but content would be the next piece, writing to those pages, and writing within the limitations of those pages and those sections, but not letting it constrain the content too much. So there's kind of a give and take of like, we have the basic outline of a page, we start writing it. And then during writing, you might realize that I've got a 4 icon section, I need 6 icons. Or I've got a paragraph here, but realistically, this needs to be 2 different sections. So we need to create something. So it's like you have a design process
that happens there.
Right. Yeah. You kind of have to go like give and take between the content and the design. So then once the content's written, then you'll usually modify the design a bit, enter the content, you're doing all your testing, quality assurance, filling in images, doing kind of last minute checks, pushing your site live, which is a big step. And then just making sure it keeps living. Your site should never be done. Your site should always be being worked on. Pretty much, it's going to be a living, breathing organism for your company, essentially. So just thinking about our site's live, but what's the next step? What are we adding on? How do we make sure that all of the white papers we're writing are getting added to pages, and kind of mapping out like ongoing improvements and checks that you'll be doing.
Okay. I want to come back to that, to continuous improvement and maintenance. But first, let's pick on Jamie for a while.
Sounds good.
So Jamie, just what are some of the things that go into web content development? What should a marketer be thinking about as they enter into this phase of the redesign process?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into content development before you ever start writing content that needs to be thought about up front. So, as Aaron just talked through, web strategy is one of those key areas, but we also need to think about corporate messaging and core segment messaging. So, having this messaging defined up front before you ever start writing your web pages, that's going to expedite your development process. It's going to make it a lot smoother as well because you'll already have your key focus areas defined and you'll know what you want your top level pillar pages to be. And from there, that's when you can start building out page templates or wireframes. So as Aaron mentioned, your templates should guide your content. They should be adaptable though. It shouldn't hinder what you want to write. You should be able to change those as needed. Mm-hmm. And your sources. And what I mean by your sources is not just source content, but your subject matter experts and also your reviewers. And I think defining your reviewers up front is something that gets missed a lot. And that's important because if your reviewers are involved in the strategy up front, then they might have some feedback that they want you to change, but it's actually, key to your goals and your strategy. So I think having all of that defined up front is going to make for a much smoother content development process.
Jamie, when I talk to people that are raring to go on their website redesigns, and I ask them about, what about your brand messaging? How long, has it been since you've worked on this? Do you have a formal document you can share? And they say, no, but I need my website now. So what are some of the pitfalls of not doing that work up front? How does that result? Otherwise, you said it takes longer, obviously. Yeah. Are there other issues with not having that in place?
Yeah, I think a big issue too, besides time, is going to be consistency. So I think that you're going to run into consistency issues with your website without having that, corporate messaging, brand messaging, or, core segment messaging defined up front. You're going to find that your pages, one person subject matter expert for this page might define something this way, and then someone else is going to have a different definition of it.
Oh, that's a great example of where you mentioned the word Frankenstein earlier to talk about design. It sounds like content can be Frankenstein too. And that's a good pitfall you described right there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about writing. So there's a lot of content that goes onto websites, and I feel like people underestimate just how much time it takes to write. So what approaches do you commonly see people take when it comes to their web content?
Yeah, I think one thing that we see that's really common that instead of, we have a lot of people that come to us and they're used to writing blogs or maybe white papers or case studies as marketing content. Well, web content is its own thing. And so we see a lot of people that come to us and they want to get across so much on their web page. They're thinking about it like a white paper. Well, really, your web page just needs to be that resource that's going to drive your viewers to some of that lead generating content. And so the way I like to think about it is I have my 4 C's of web writing. So I think web writing should be clear, it should be concise, it should be cohesive and consistent.
Clear, concise, cohesive, consistent. Okay, got it. I like that.
Yeah.
So who does the writing?
Yeah, so there's a couple approaches you could take to who actually does the writing. You could take an all outsourced approach, working with an agency such as TREW Marketing. You could take an approach where you do it all internally, or there's a blended approach that you could take. And, Aaron and I have seen the blended approach be really successful for some clients that might have some time and budget and resource constraints. But, we've worked with several people where we work on those kind of top pillar pages, their homepage, their about page, and then they work on defining the lower level content under that. And that could be a really nice approach when, you really need some expertise on defining these pages, but maybe, with your lower level, you have some other resource constraints.
Yeah. And so when you have this hybrid approach, I'm guessing that there's one editor regardless that's looking across every single page on the site to ensure consistency.
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. We like to refer to that as maybe your website champion, and they are the person in charge of making sure that there is that cohesiveness and that consistency because as people don't look at websites in sequence. They're looking for the information that they need to get. And so it's really important to have that key person who's going to oversee the whole website project to ensure that cohesiveness and that consistency.
Okay. Erin, is as the person that's often overseeing a website design project from beginning to end, what is the number one thing that pushes things back past deadline on the client side?
Oh my goodness. It's missed deadlines. It's missed deadlines with content. Content always takes considerably longer than they expect, or they're not getting the input. So it's like Jamie said, important to have your champion. That champion needs to have pull internally. They need to be able to go to the subject matter expert and say, hey, I need this info from you. Or to go to the writer and say, you owe me edits. 100%, that's what causes delays. It's content not getting done on time.
I knew you would say that.
Yeah, to build on that, Erin, I think part of it too is because I think a lot of times the expectation is, oh, we'll just move over our old content. And then we realize, ooh, this is outdated. Maybe we don't do this anymore. We don't talk about this way. And so that really adds to it when the expectation was, oh, we've already got everything we need. And then we realize we don't.
I can't tell you how often I hear that from people and I have to argue with them and say, it's not in the same format. Your page looks completely different. Even if your content is great, your messaging is 100% up to date and accurate and everything is wonderful. You're maybe going to be able to move 60% of that. And then you're going to have to create somehow another 60%. It's like a Frankenstein page of your sections aren't going to line up. Your content's not going to line up. Your page structure is going to change so much. You can't just copy paste. It doesn't work that way.
And just to give a very tangible example, when we redesigned the TREW Marketing website 2 years ago, it's been 2 years now, ish, year and a half. Okay.
A little over a year. Yeah.
Well, when we did it, which was in recent memory, same thing. Our service pages, the old ones were, introduction, paragraph, and some bullets and some resources. And that was it. And then the new pages had these icons with descriptors and sections. And we felt it was important to have a longer scrolling page that went into more depth. But that required us to rewrite our service pages, even though they weren't necessarily dated. They just didn't have the level of detail or match those new templates. So it did take a considerable effort. And those are very important pages. We only have 6 of them. So
they paid off.
They did.
So when we look at the metrics, time on site, engagement, all of that, for some pages went up 300%. It went from 20 seconds to 2.5 minutes. Click-through rates went from 3% to 15%. So it, styles change, but also it's a really good chance to rethink. Just because something's fine doesn't mean it's as good as it could be. And I think for TREW, that was a really, really big piece of it. We were updating our site because we didn't like our template as much anymore. It wasn't working as well for us. We wanted something that was more modern. We fell into the pitfall that everyone does of thinking it's about design, and really it's about content. As much as you keep your site living, it's a good chance to sit down and think about everything you've been doing. And great, we're redoing all of this. How do we do it better? How do we make it more modern and approachable and relevant to who we are now? And it made a big difference for us.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Well, Jamie, tell me, so as you are managing the content portion and doing writing or managing a group of writers, depending on the situation, obviously the site also needs to be optimized. Is that something that the person tasked with writing that page does, or is that something somebody else does afterwards? What does that look like?
That's a really good question. Erin and I have talked about this a lot because, especially recently, there's been so much evolution in the way that search engines that they track and look for content, and they've become smarter. And, it's not about 15 years ago, I remember writing content that, we had to insert these specific keywords and we had to make sure they linked to a certain page. And, that's not necessarily the approach anymore. It's more about writing what's going to work for you, what your personas, what your target audience needs. And then as part of the continuous improvement, we just barely, touched on a little bit so far, then the optimization, it's better that is coming as a continuous improvement effort. And Erin can touch on that a little bit more as far as how we handle that, because it's not all about certain keywords anymore. You really wanting to become an authority on a certain topic, and that is more of an extended process.
Look at that nice segue into continuous improvement right there. All right, Erin.
It's like we've done this before.
Yes.
Talk to us. What do you optimize up front? And then how do you approach that during continuous improvement?
Yep, good question. So as Jamie said, it's not that we're not thinking about search engine optimization when we're creating content, but it's more looking at that user intent and saying, we're going to answer the user's big questions. We're going to address their core care abouts. It's the same tack that we take with content planning, where we're saying, what do our personas care about in terms of a core topic, and what are kind of the offshoots of that topic we can talk about? And then ongoing, there's a couple different buckets to look at for ongoing improvements. A lot of this comes down to just consistent reporting and check-ins. It makes you look at your site. There's certain things that I'll look at weekly, monthly, quarterly, and then annually. So then weekly is like a health check. It's like just keeping an eye on your visitors, your form submissions, your new contacts, really high level numbers, just so that you can flag 3 weeks in a row if your numbers tank and it's maybe not summertime or not a time that you expect to see your numbers drop off. There's a problem and you can address it. And then looking monthly, looking at slightly deeper. So understanding like month over month, what are my email metrics doing? What are my sources doing in terms of traffic referrals? Again, so that, because catching something over the span of a month is not a long time. You can usually course correct that pretty well. It hasn't tanked your year. It hasn't done anything bad for you. So looking at some of those deeper engagement metrics to identify problems, that's a lot of what those kind of quick metric reports look at. Quarterly, you're going to do that deep dive. So that's where you might look at those SEO terms. You might actually go into, if you're really concerned about search, you'll go into your search console and you'll look at like your trending keywords over time to understand, we just optimized this page. Why isn't it performing better? Why haven't we crawled up in search rankings? Why are clicks not up? That's when you can actually start doing a little bit more of that analysis and kind of diagnosing what your problems are. And so we definitely don't do that for every single term because it is extremely time consuming. And like Jamie said, search engines don't run on just keywords. So a lot of the time if you did it for everything across your site, it'd be a huge amount of time and resources wasted, and it wouldn't really do anything for you. But we will do that for like certain high priority pages. If, for example, one of our core service pages just wasn't performing as well as the others, that would be my first step in terms of like diagnosis to say, is this just less popular? Are we not ranking as well? Is it not optimized as well? Is there a different term for it? Like sales enablement, some people call pipeline analysis or pipeline engagement or something like that. So sometimes it is that there's maybe different terms or a different way to write the page or optimize it that your content's not matching up. So that's where the SEO and the kind of deep dive into performance comes in, is like that quarterly check-in.
Yeah. And it seems like the templates now provide a fail safe. So it's really easy to get your metadata in there, your title tags, all of that table stake type of search information, that on-site optimization. That's kind of a given. But what you guys are describing is really what is the difference maker with search engines. And that's creating relational information that helps the user, that links them throughout the site, and shows that you're an expert in a topic and provides a lot of resources to them. So it's exactly a win-win. Good. Yep. Well, anything else we haven't covered, or perhaps some parting advice to those marketers that are about to launch into their website redesigns?
It's going to take more time than you think it's going to, and it's worth it. Truck through. I would say also making that continuous optimization plan before you start. I think a lot of people finish their website and don't want to think about web like ever again. And then that just loops you back in the same cycle. It means that then your website quickly gets outdated. You're not updating it. So I would have that plan up front, have your scorecards up front, assign somebody who's going to be responsible for checking those, and factor it into your marketing plan. Think about each year, like what future opportunities are coming up. And Jamie has a good point about this of like, if you have a business goal of expanding a service area and you don't have a page on that service area, you're going to need one. You're going to need content on that service area. So it's like factoring in your web improvements to your marketing plan, and also saying like each year, are you looking at your strategy? Has your core business strategy changed, and does that impact your web strategy? Do you see from your metrics that some pages do really well and some pages don't? Factor that into your annual marketing plan, because you're going to need to make those improvements. So there's some checkpoints there to look at. Same thing with just, make sure you've got a plan going forward, because it's not done. It's never done.
And Jamie?
Yes, that's exactly right, Erin. As far as that evolving content, your web content can involve just like writing a blog post can too. So if you have that key focus area during your business planning that you identify, if it's really a big goal for your company, and companies change, your focus area is going to change. The way you're going to grow might change and evolve over time. So don't treat your website like a static asset, I guess, is my biggest piece of advice, because that content can be changed. And that does come back to partially with the strategy too, of making sure that you plan for that and don't create this custom site that's going to be, really hard to just change a paragraph on in the future.
Not worth it.
No.
Good advice from you both. Thank you so much. Where can our listeners and viewers learn more and connect with you?
Sure. So we obviously both work at TREW. There's plenty of resources on the TREW website, and Jamie and I are actually going to be doing a webinar going really in depth in website, especially strategy and content. So digging in more into things like, we've teased some of the things you should have prepared ahead of time, but really walking through those steps in detail in terms of, if you want to do strategy yourself, here's what we do on our side. Here's how you can make sure it works. Here's our recommendations in terms of people to include and timelines and all of that. So really going into the depth of both of those kind of focus areas for web, the strategy and the content. So that'll be September 22nd at noon Central Time. We've got it listed on the TREW website. If you go onto our website service page, it's linked off of that and you can register. And then of course, we've got blog posts about our services and web and content and pretty much all the information you could ever want to know, and probably more.
And will that webinar be on demand after the live event? Okay, so if someone's hearing this later, just making sure.
Yes. Yep.
All right, very good. Well, thank you both for your time and lots of great advice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit truemarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and our newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.